nation and our Constitution.
Well, welcome to National Earthquake Day here in the United States, everybody. I'm Joe Joseph. That's right, it's the 18th of October. And, of course, if you lived in FEMA Region 3, then you know all too well about what happened today. The great earthquake drill, duck and cover. Duck and cover. You know how well that works. Tonight we have such a good show for you. John Hankey, an acclaimed documentary filmmaker, joins us tonight. And Timmy, the subject matter is one of great importance with the election right around the corner.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That's John's done a lot of great films. You know, JFK 2, one of the ones that I just love for forever. But a new film called Romney Exposed, which you can see on YouTube right now, folks, for free. It's called Romney Exposed, and that's on YouTube. And John's connected some dots here with Romney that a little bit unsettling.
Yeah, very unsettling indeed. And to talk more about that, I'd like to welcome John to the broadcast. John, welcome to the show.
Hey, guys. Thank you for having me. I'm more than happy to be here.
Fantastic. So, what made you guy go down this path and dig into Romney a little bit? What's the background on it? What piqued your interest?
Well, I guess I started where the video starts. And, let me say at the top, you can't buy this video, but you can watch it for free. I mean, I made it because I wanted people to see it. And I don't know, I'm a teacher, right? I teach high school. I teach English and history, but in the process of teaching English and history, I sometimes teach a little geometry. And for the purpose of showing that if you line the evidence up right, you have a proof on your hands. And, if you scramble it up just a little bit, it turns into a mess. But if you line it up right, you can prove that A squared plus B squared equals C squared, right, in terms of right triangles and whatnot. But
sure. So
I would encourage people to not be satisfied with this, listening to this, but to watch the thing, because it's, I spent a lot of time and effort lining all of this stuff up, and I'll try and do that again tonight, but I won't bet on hitting every single nail on the head, and there's about 150 of them. Anyhow, I'm sitting there observing events, and I see that, very clearly, I think to anybody who's watching, that Romney is the choice of the huge money, that the Republican establishment clearly are backing him, and it's sort of like, a zombie. You can't kill him, right? He loses, and 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 he's still there, and the front runner.
And the banks as well. One interesting little tidbit that we talked about earlier this week was the fact that the big banks have totally abandoned Obama and have all flocked over to Romney. As a matter of fact, I think 9 out of his top 10 donors are Wall Street banks, whereas Obama only has one, Wells Fargo, in the top 20. So it's very interesting.
One of the things we're going to talk about tonight, in addition to that, is that you don't know who Romney's top donors are because he has all these PACs, these super PACs, and you don't know who the people are. And there's this one, it isn't more than 3 or 4 seconds, but it's a clip that I found on the Internet, and I'm not even sure who it is. Some news program is exposing a story that came and went in a flash, that Romney was given $2 million one day by an organization that disappeared the next day. Right? He gave him $2 million one day, and it was gone the next day, and nobody knows who the people are, what the sources were. And that is so typical of Romney's from start to finish, that everything that he does is absolutely black. You don't have a clue of anything about him, including the people that support him, although, and you were asking me, that's how we got started down this road, was how I got started, which was that I noticed that he was very, very cozy with all of the Bushes. And I presume that the people in your audience are aware of the role of, that 9/11 was an inside job.
Oh, yeah.
And if they're not.
They're very much aware of that.
Yeah,
okay.
I have a very perceptive audience, yes. They pick up on that stuff, and it's good that you come out and you say that, but So in your Bush research, would you say that you came about the knowledge that Romney's comfy cozy with him?
Well, I didn't have to do any research. I'm just sitting there watching, right? And it seems to me, and although you can't find this story anymore, I remember hearing that Jeb Bush was his campaign chairman in 2004. But if it's true, they erased it from the internet, and I'm not certain. Well, I'm not certain, but I remember it anyway. And I've always found that to be very, very dark and very, very disturbing. And anybody who is a good, hardcore friend of the Bushes, I think, has got to be a very fundamentally evil person. And if somebody wants to point out. If somebody wants to point out the error of that statement, I'd be glad to listen to it. But, I think John McCain, the saving grace of John McCain that makes it seem like at least once upon a time he was a real solid human being, was the fact that he hated the Bushes and they hated him. But, anybody who loves the Bushes and the Bushes love him back, I think that's somebody that you want to watch out for. And then... this is the thing. I mean, I guess there's always something that lights a fire under your butt to get you going, because you can sit there stewing on something forever. The thing that lit the fire under my rear end was when Dick Cheney held a fundraiser for Romney, and at the fundraisers, of course, they had a dark session where no reporters were allowed whatsoever. And, where we can assume talked about what disgusting people 47% of the population of the United States is, we're all a bunch of loafers and
of course, yeah.
Sponges. Jesus Christ. Anyway. Oh, man. I won't go down that path, but, just the stories that you can tell, right? I mean, Romney has 16 houses. He didn't build any of those.
Of course not.
But the guys who built those houses, he would regard as, loafers and sponges and whatnot.
Right.
And certainly they're part of the 47% that he thinks is disgusting and looking for a handout. Yeah, right. I mean, they work their asses off, and what do you think? They want to retire, and they think they should have medical benefits. What the?
Yeah.
They're sponges after, devoting their lives to cutting his lawn and building his house and whatnot. Anyhow, so Cheney endorses Romney and has this fundraiser for him, and they have the secret session, and they bar the photographers from taking pictures of Romney and Cheney together, because Cheney understands how thoroughly hated he is by a huge portion, by the intelligent portion of the Republican base, right? I mean, there's in my experience, more Republicans buy my video than Democrats. Right, really? And because they want to hear the story of what evil people the Bushes are, it's my impression that Republicans have very often a much more fundamental understanding of the evil of the Bushes than Democrats do.
Really?
Anyhow, yeah, seriously, I'm not kidding you. Right? No, Democrats don't like him because he doesn't like liberals, and because whatever, he says things against abortion and whatever else that. A liberal person would, so they have a liberal dislike for Bush. Mm-hmm. But I find that Republicans very often have a more fundamental hatred of Bush and recognize and readily understand that he was involved in the assassination attempt on Reagan, and that he was involved in the assassination of John Kennedy. And if you tell them that story, in my experience, I was in Dallas once at an assassination convention, and it just so happened that the Republican, I don't know, the Texas Republican Party was having a small convention of the leadership, and this woman comes strutting up, and all full of herself and so on, and she walks up to us and she sees the sign, about the Kennedy assassination, and she says, "All right, who killed him?" And we're all looking at each other saying, "Well, how are you going to explain that in 25 words or less?"
Right.
And she says, "The CFR." And I said, "Lady, wow. you can't say it in 3 letters better than you just did."
No, that's right. Hold that thought, John. When we come back, We'll get more with John Hankey as we dive into Mitt Romney and expose him for the dapper gentleman he is. We'll be right back after these messages. Talk Radio with you wherever you go by listening to us on your smartphone with the TuneIn app. Just download the free software, then do a search for Orion Talk Radio. Save us as a preset, and then you can listen to Orion Talk Radio anywhere, anytime. Orion on TuneIn, a must-have app for your smartphone. Joe Joseph and Tim Watts, we're talking to John Hankey, acclaimed documentary film producer, and I'll tell you what, this Romney Exposed thing did definitely there's some things that I didn't really understand about Romney. Well, I didn't understand that. I understood that he was a dog. I mean, that's just the way it is. I'm not a person that sees the left-right paradigm as being something really realistic. I kind of look at it as a political form of WWE, and that's kind of what it is. It's theater, but I mean in a real way. And Mr. Romney has always been kind of entangled in some different things, but you kind of brought out something very interesting. And at the beginning of the documentary, when you started talking about Bain Capital and how it came from and spawned off of Bain and Company, is that right?
Well, sure. We didn't. Can we wrap up that point about Cheney first?
Oh yeah. No, by all means, Cheney. Yes.
I mean, it takes 30 seconds, but I mean,
sure.
Cheney did his fundraiser, and at the fundraiser, he said that Mitt Romney is the kind of guy we need to have during the next 9/11.
Oh, right. That's right. Yeah, that's kind of important.
I saw that, and in the video, I say, you hit the pause button and set your hair on fire and run naked down the street screaming that if Romney's elected, Cheney has guaranteed us that there's going to be another 9/11. I'm sorry. Let's take that up for a minute because
that's significant, isn't it, Timmy?
Well, absolutely.
Well, these are the terrorists, right? I mean, in the video, you also get to see, if you didn't know, that Mineta, the Secretary of Transportation, telling the 9/11 Commission that Cheney ordered the stand down, and describing the stand down, and describing this young officer young soldier running into the war room where Cheney's sitting and saying that the plane is 50 miles out. What are we going to do? And Cheney doesn't say anything. It's 40 miles out. It's 30 miles out. It's 10 miles out. And at 10 miles, the young soldier says, "Do the orders still stand?" And Cheney, Mineta describes how he's furious and whips his head around and says, "Have you heard anything to the contrary?" Of course the order still stands. Well, and obviously the order is the order for a stand down. These are the terrorists, and God bless America. And they torture people, right? Khalid Sheikh Mohammed is on trial. He's been waterboarded 83 times, and he's innocent. I don't know that the Nazis tortured innocent people. They didn't try to torture innocent people. I don't believe the Nazis tortured people that they knew were innocent. They tortured people who they suspected were guilty. Good gravy. These guys have sodium pentothal, and they're torturing a guy who they know is innocent 183 times. And what I want to talk about is Obama said that he was going to put Khalid Sheikh Mohammed on trial. And when I heard that, in New York City, which is, what you're supposed to do, right? You try the person where the crime was committed. And I got all excited and thought, God, what a beautiful forum for 9/11 truthers, right? They're going to be on I'm going to fly into New York and be on the courthouse steps every morning screaming that these guys are innocent and that 9/11 was an inside job. And, it's going to be covered with cameras. There's going to be cameras everywhere. Sure, and we're going to be on camera delivering this message. This is going to be fabulous. And Cheney goes on the Sunday news programs and says, if Obama puts those guys on trial, the terrorists will set off a nuclear weapon in New York City. And Obama says, oh, okay. If Cheney threatens to set off a nuclear weapon in New York City, you better take that threat seriously. And Obama did. And, how can you fault him, right? Cheney threatens to set up a nuclear weapon in New York City and he backed down. Well, good gravy. When would you not back down? Who would that threat come from that it wouldn't be taken to be taken seriously?
John,
anyhow,
I think that's a good point, because I think a lot of times people don't realize the nefarious powers that be, the untold wealth that they have at their disposal. And you got to think about, the apparatus and, the kind of things that they've got, the destructive measures at their means also. So I don't put any of that out of the realm. I think there's a lot of behind the scenes, blackmailing going on all the time. From the
there's an article I wrote called Barack and the Crosshairs. I think that's what it's called. It's either Barack or Obama and the Crosshairs, and in any case, it first of all draws a number of parallels between Obama and John Kennedy in terms of both of them coming in and inheriting a military that was absolutely insanely rabid, right? And in Kennedy's case, It was Curtis LeMay and on and on and on, right? All of the members of the Joint Chiefs of Staff who were just insanely rabid anti-communists and were willing to start World War III in order to keep Cuba from being communist, right? Start World War III and incur, by their estimates, 40 million American casualties, and to them that was an acceptable loss if you were able to eradicate communism anyhow. And in the case of Obama, he comes in and he's got all these insanely rabid, militant Christians who hate Muslims and think that we need to make war on, not on terror, but on Muslims, on Islam. And in fact, in the video, I don't mention this in the video, there's a guy in the video named Elliot Abrams. And Elliot Abrams, because Romney and those guys did the attacks in Libya. It's very, very clear. The evidence is all laid out in the video. I think it's overwhelming. To me, it's beyond any shadow of a doubt that Romney and his crew did it. But this guy, Elliot Abrams, who is one of the people who made one of these remarks that really solidly seals that there's no way that these guys aren't the ones who did this. But Elliot Abrams has been quoted as saying, he's a member of PNAC. He's one of Romney's top advisors. PNAC, for the people in the audience who are not overly familiar, is the Project for a New American Century, and they are absolutely the guys who planned and plotted. It's Cheney and Rumsfeld and a number of Bush's people, Wolfowitz and Pearl, the top hawks in Bush's cabinet. And before Bush was elected, these guys wrote a document saying that we need a new Pearl Harbor in the Middle East in order to justify having wars for oil. And, then Bush gets elected and all these guys come in and then they make it happen and are intimately involved. But so there's this guy, Elliot Abrams, and that's what Obama walks into, is a military that thinks we need to be making war on Islam instead of war on terrorism. And Kennedy was in a similar situation. Anyhow, in this article, Barack and the Crosshairs, you'll find it interesting, and it's all over the internet. Jeff Brent's posted it, and it's a bunch of other places. But it lays out, I think, what we were just describing, these dark machinations behind the scenes. There's just such overwhelming evidence that Obama did not want to send more troops to Afghanistan, and then he did. And in the meantime, I think they threatened his life. I think it's very clear that, you remember those two people who crashed the White House party?
Yes,
the
couple,
a man and a woman, and they walked in and they shook hands. They shook hands with Nancy Pelosi. They shook hands with Biden, and they shook hands with Obama. And if they'd had biological agents on their hands, who would be president of the United States? I don't know, but it wouldn't have been Obama, Biden, or Nancy Pelosi.
Yeah.
Anyhow. And I think that was the warning shot that was, fired at Obama. Because, how did those guys get in? It was the most secure function, perhaps in the history of the White House, right? You had this leading Hindu. It was the Prime Minister of India, who all of the Muslims in East Asia hate, right? Because there's this terrible tension between Pakistan and India, which is a tension between Muslims and Hindus. And so you have this Hindu guy there, and, the leading antagonist to the Islamic world. And these guys managed to get through the security and shake hands with these people, and then blah, blah, blah. There's all these dark machinations, and if you're interested in that stuff, Google, and you find it at Jeff Rent's. It's a very complete version of it.
Fantastic. Hold that thought, John. Hold that thought. When we come back, more with
Rabbit Hole with Popeye, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday nights, 10 o'clock Eastern, and Sundays, 5 to 7 right here on Orion News Talk Radio. Joe Joseph and Tim Watts, Freedom Link, tonight with our special guest, filmmaker John Hankey, noted for doing the film JFK 2. Great film, but he's just released a new film that's called Romney Exposed. And just wrapping up our thought from the previous set there, John, about his connections with the Dark Lord of the Sith and Bush, and my gosh, I'm telling you what, those are some entangling alliances.
Well, and the question that hit me, right? I mentioned that I saw that Cheney had done this fundraiser, and that he had said that Romney's the guy that you want to have for the next 9/11 type attack. And that just scared the hell out of me and said, oh, I have to get going. And it was at that moment that I said, I'm going to make a video, and this is what it's going to be about. And, at that point, that was the only point that I knew that I was going to have in there, was that, look, one, Cheney's guilty. He's the guy who called for the stand down in the Pentagon. That's demonstrable. You have the most credible witness that you could hope to have saying so. And if he has chosen Romney has to have done something in order to earn that position, right? I mean, if you want to work for the mafia, you don't just come waltzing in and say, yeah, you have to earn your bone. You have to make your bone. That's the term that they use, which means you have to go out and commit a murder, and you have to do it so that they can witness it, so that they know that they can trust you, because they have the evidence that you committed this murder, and so they know that you'll never rat them out because they can blackmail you the way that you can blackmail them. And so what is it that Romney did that persuaded Cheney that he was trustworthy, right, that they could use him in a situation like 9/11, and he could be trusted to keep these very, very, very dark and, insanely cruel and murderous secrets? And so, I mean, at that point, well, the first question that might occur to you, and occurred to me, was where was Romney on 9/11? And so you go and you Google and right? I found a Salt Lake City newspaper that was talking about where he was on 9/11, and he was in Washington D.C. And well, this is kind of strange because he's supposed to be supervising the Salt Lake City Olympics. What is he doing in Washington D.C.? It's not an immediately clear correlation there. And the day before 9/11, he was at the FBI. And, we're going to talk later in the show about Libya and the fact that they responded to the Libyan attacks 2 minutes after they were announced. And on 9/11, on 9/10, he's at the FBI. What's he doing at the FBI? Well, I don't know, but I do know that on 9/11, the FBI is naming Osama bin Laden as the perpetrator. They're naming all of the hijackers. They're saying what the roles of the hijackers were. They're saying who was flying the planes. And this is hours after the attacks. And, critical thinkers like me look at stuff like that and say, well, geez, why don't you make it obvious that this is an inside job, that you had all of this stuff prepared? You couldn't possibly, no pretense of an investigation. Just boom, here, everybody, this is what you're supposed to think. I don't know what it is. They're over anxious, nervous little boys, or the point that I make in the movie is that what they are is insanely arrogant. They know that the press is never going to challenge them, is never going to point out the obvious evidence of their complicity in these crimes, so they can afford to be careless, and they can afford to make these stupid mistakes. But, for example, on 9/11 in the afternoon, naming the 18 hijackers and naming what their roles were in the hijacking, well, Romney was at FBI headquarters on 9/10, and so I connect him with the FBI's performance on 9/11, which was terrible if you are actually trying to, bring off this crime without being caught. And the essence of their error was that they spoke too soon. And then we see this same error repeated in the attacks on the Libyan embassy. But, we can head into that when you're ready.
So you found the link that he was actually in D.C. Was it D.C.? No, is it Washington? That was it?
He was in D.C. on the 11th, and he was in D.C. at FBI headquarters. I don't know where he was in D.C. on the 11th, but on the 10th, he was at FBI headquarters. Well, he's supposed to be getting ready for the Olympics. What is he doing at FBI headquarters?
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, and that's the first time I've ever heard anybody ever bring that up, but that is interesting. Another person that also flew into D.C. the night before 9/11 was H.W. Bush. And here's his son. His son is in Florida, John, getting ready to do the schoolroom down there. So what's he doing flying in and hanging out at the White House overnight and then flying out first thing the next morning?
Well, there's all of this stuff, right? I mean, the head of the ISI, of the Pakistani intelligence, which is, right, cheek to jowl, white on rice with Al-Qaeda. And he's in Washington, D.C., talking to all of these people on 9/11. So it fits the pattern of the perps that they were all there. Well, that's not necessarily ultimately persuasive, but let's go on. Do you want to play that clip, or
let's talk about
Bain?
Yeah, let's talk about where some of the money comes from. And folks, this is just a quick, 1-minute clip out of the movie that John Hankey has produced called Romney Exposed. And this talks about Bain Capital and, how he came about some of his money. So I'll roll this real quick.
In 1977, Romney went to work for Bain and Company as a corporate looter, a pirate. But in 1984, he left Bain to form a new company called Bain? Wait, what? He left Bain to form a new company in which he was the president, CEO, and the sole stockholder. So it was in truth Romney Capital. Bill Bain had nothing to do with it. But they called it Bain Capital. What's up with that? That's a deception, clearly. Romney hid the true nature of what he was starting. But to what purpose? You keep thinking about that one, and please also notice that because he was the president and the CEO and the sole stockholder of Bain, he could write checks, sign contracts, sign audits. He could do anything without ever having to explain or tell anyone anything about what went on in this place with the phony name Bain Capital.
Wow. Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah, it's
that's
huge.
incredible. So let's go into that a little bit now.
Well, I'll give myself props for that one because, none of that was very secret information, I don't think. I think that was all out in the public, but nobody ever asked the question, right? If it was Romney Capital, why did they call it Bain Capital? And, I had to see, have all this other evidence in front of me and be looking at it to have it hit me in the face. Oh, if he's the president and CEO and sole stockholder, he doesn't have to talk to anybody. He doesn't have to show his books to anybody. He can do anything he wants, and nobody is privy to it. And see, when you do this stuff, right, you learn the MO, the modus operandi, and so you recognize the pattern when you see it for the second time. George H.W. Bush founded Zapata Offshore with Bill Leitke, who had founded Pennzoil. So, Leitke is an expert. He's very, very seasoned, very, very hugely successful, and he gets together with Bush and forms Zapata Offshore. So, Bush is in league with somebody who's legitimate and who knows what he's doing, and they get it up and running, and then Leitke leaves, and Bush is the sole owner and stockholder and so on, so that he's not in league with anybody. He's running this thing entirely on his own. So he's doing all these, he's providing cover for all these CIA operations in the Caribbean, and he doesn't have to answer to anybody, and there's nobody looking over his shoulder. So that when I saw that, I didn't see it the first time that it was presented to me, but then I'm reading this LA Times article, which is also, and I'll give myself props for that. When I tell you something, I show you the article from the LA Times, right? I don't tell you what the article says. I show you what the article says, that a huge portion of Romney's original investors in Bain Capital were these guys who ran their millions of dollars through all of these Panamanian money laundering fronts before it went into Bain Capital. And he brings in this guy who is CIA connected in Nicaragua, which was the center of the CIA Bush's Ollie North and so on. It's the center of their CIA operations. They bring this guy into Bain Capital, and he brings in all of these guys who have to launder their money before it can get into Bain Capital. And this guy, his name is Harry Strachan, and he tells, I think the LA Times interviewed him. He told somebody, and anyway, the Times article is front and center. It's the backbone of this whole 40-minute piece. But they got the information that Strachan says that, according to Strachan, Romney was worried that this was going to be drug money, and Strachan assured him that it wasn't. And the question that I raised in the video, well, if it wasn't drug money, why did it have to get laundered? And it did get laundered, so how does Strachan know whether it was drug money or not? He had no way of knowing, and except that he was also CIA connected, and these people were all CIA connected. And
seems to be a trend with these people. When we come back, folks, more with John Hankey as we talk about money laundering. We'll be back after these messages. Don't go away. The last segment of hour number one. And I'd like to remind everybody about the Orion Chip-In banner. If you like what you hear on Orion Talk Radio, you can help us with a personal donation through our online Chip-In banner. Look for it on our website on the left-hand side of the homepage. Give it a click, and you can Help us spread the truth by supporting one of the fastest-growing talk radio outlets in the world. We sincerely thank you for helping us get the truth out. Orion News Talk, news and views beyond the mainstream media. Joe Joseph and Tim Watts, along with our very special guest, John Hankey. We were talking about how Romney's company was very active in the money laundering business, especially when it came to drug money from down south. You want to finish your thought on that, John, and then we can move on?
Well, what I want to do is hit it over the fence. Are you ready? Because all I've really done is laid some dots out for you, but I won't say that I've connected them, right? I've shown that Bush, maybe I haven't shown it. You need to know. And in the video, you get to hear Ricky Ross, the biggest drug dealer in L.A., say that he was working for George Bush. You get to hear Cele Castillo, who was a frontline DEA agent in Guatemala, saying that he walked up to Bush, who had come to visit, and said, those planes over there are CIA and they're loaded with cocaine. And Bush smiled at him and walked away. And Cele Castillo says from that point on, he knew that the cocaine traffic was being directed from the very highest levels of the government. And then you get to hear the head of DEA tell 60 Minutes, absolutely, the CIA was dealing cocaine by the ton. Well, you know, you're not going to get better evidence than that. But so there's one big dot, is that George Bush, who's very, very good friends with Romney, is sitting in the middle of all of this drug traffic. Romney is bringing in all of these people who are from that area, who are laundering their money through Panamanian banks that are infamous for laundering drug money. But that doesn't prove it was drug money. The fact that these guys were brought in by a CIA guy, well, that doesn't prove it was drug money. This proves it was drug money. Bernie Madoff is sitting in prison for trying to pay 10.5% per year. And everybody that you know, if you Google it and look around, you will find that there isn't anyone who doesn't say that Bernie Madoff was not a brilliant investor. He was a brilliant investor, but in order to pay 10.5 per year, he had to break the law. Mitt Romney paid 173% per year. 17 times.
That's unbelievable. What an unbelievable figure.
Right? It's absolutely insane.
Let's stop for a minute, just so folks catch just the gravity of that. Again, 10.5%, and that's the best that Madoff could pay. 10.5%, and he's paying 173% every year for 10 years.
For 10 years.
Wow.
And so, I mean, of course, if that doesn't draw the line that solidly connects your dots, I give up. You know, okay.
Yeah. There's dirty money.
There's right.
Money clearly involved there. Yeah.
A squared plus B squared does not equal C squared. I can't do it better than that. But you know, while we're on that particular topic, I'd like to bring up the fact. Watch this. That it was really sweet. Poor little Newt Gingrich was complaining that he had one billionaire supporting him. This guy, I've written his name down so that Adelson. And he had one billionaire supporting him, and Romney had 16. Romney had more money than every Republican candidate put together. So where is all this money coming from? Well, Jack Hanley was the CEO. He's mentioned in the Times article. He told the Times that he put $1 million in, and that that Romney made him rich. And so I sat down with my calculator, and I challenge you to do it. It's a little bit complicated, but and I won't go into all of the math. But if you compound it, if you take $1 million and pay 173, well, you now have 173. That is 1,730,000 plus the 1 million you put in. So you now have 2,730,000. The second year, that's what you start off with, and then you do that by 173, and then you take the interest and the principal, and you add them together, and you do that 10 times, and at the end of 10 years, you have $14 billion. Wow. And it's my suggestion that the reason that Romney has so many billionaires lined up supporting him is that he manufactured them, that any clown who could scrape together $1 million, and that's a lot of clowns, any clown who could scrape together $1 million walked out with $14 billion 10 years later. And so, I've stumbled onto that, right? And I say that's what it is. The money laundering is creating all of these super dark CIA candidate backing billionaires. And then I read in the paper that Adelson, who is the one who's in the light, right? All of the rest of these guys are hiding in the dark, flooding all of his money in. But Adelson is out there in the light, and he's being investigated for money laundering. I'm sorry, it struck me before I saw that article, I thought, Adelson runs a casino. Well, if you want to launder money, what is a better place to do it than a casino?
Absolutely.
Right? If you have an automobile factory like Mitt Romney's honorable father, you can't launder money because the books will show how much steel you bought and how much rubber you bought and how much you paid your workers and how many cars you sold. And, where's the stretch where you sneak some money in and, right? But if you run a casino, you just have the CIA guys go in and they drop $1 million on the table, and you don't have to show paperwork to anybody, right? And you didn't pay the bartenders more. You didn't pay the craft table people anymore. You just show more in your receipts at the end of the day. Having a casino is an ideal place to launder money. And sure enough, Adelson's people got busted laundering money. It wasn't drug money, and if it had been drug money, they wouldn't have got busted. It was laundering other money. The people, public officials who had embezzled public funds, and they followed these guys to Adelson's casino where they dropped this money and they laundered it. Right, the casino laundered it for these guys and gave them back a percentage. I thought we should talk for just a second about what money laundering is. I don't know if everybody knows, but can I spend 90 seconds explaining?
No, by all means, go ahead. No,
okay,
it's very important information.
So you walk to you walk to the Panamanian Bank, and you put in $30 million in the back door, and you put $1 million in the front door. Or let's say you put $10 million in the back door and $1 million in the front door. The $10 million is completely unaccounted for, but if they're paying you 173% per year, at the end of 3 years, you walk out with something like $9 million. Well, you put in 30, but those 30 were dirty, and you couldn't spend them, you couldn't bank them, you couldn't do anything with them. But 3 years later, you walk out with this check from Romney, and it's Bain Capital. Well, Bain is a respectable name. Well, it was until. Right, in fact, right, you see what I'm saying. The original Bain was a respectable name, and that's why when Romney formed his new secret dark organization that he called Bain Capital, that's why he called it Bain Capital, because Bain had a name. It made him sound legitimate despite the fact that he was completely corrupt. And, I got to say that in watching Romney's campaign and just watching him stumble from one disaster to another, I'm thinking, what kind of businessman is this guy? And then, when you look into what kind of businessman he is, he's completely corrupt. Of course he's successful. It's not from being brilliant. It's from being corrupt.
He's born with a silver spoon in his mouth. So, I mean, it's not like, he has, I don't think he's ever suffered a day in his life.
Or sweated.
Or sweated. Exactly,
sweated.
Right.
Or been in an honest contest of any sort.
Exactly. And that's, one of the troubles that I have with him is the fact that he doesn't have any of that life experience. There is absolutely zero sweat coming off that guy's brow. And if it is, he's got somebody there to wipe it up.
Well, that might have been true of John Kennedy for all I know. Right? I mean, excuse me, I'm sorry. He was in World War II, wasn't he? And his boat got shot out from under him, didn't it? Well, so in fact, he did go through some stuff. But there, I don't want to be hating on people who were born with silver spoons in their mouth. It's possible that you could, run into a person who was in that situation, but who, had a heart and, had a deep understanding and was devoted to the public good, and that they go in there and they could possibly do a good job. So I don't want to hold that against him. I hold against him the fact that he's in league with the dirtiest monsters in the history of the world, which I guess brings us to our next topic, which is the death squads.
And we'll pick that up in the next hour. Real quick, before this hour lets out, was there a feud between the Bushes and the Kennedys, would you say?
Boy, wouldn't you? Well,
I mean, like and I'm not saying like, it's more of like a Prescott versus Joe Kennedy is the way I've always seen it. You know what I mean? Two very polar opposites, but both coming from the same place.
I think it's important to understand. Have you seen the movie Titanic?
Sure.
In the movie Titanic, there's the millionaire, and then there's his thug. Right? And his thug sets out to kill poor little Leonardo DiCaprio. In the movie Moulin Rouge, there's the Duke, and then there's his thug. And his thug sets out to kill I forget the guy's name, and it doesn't matter, but my point is that the millionaires have their thugs, and the Bushes are thugs.
Yeah, that's a fact. Folks, hour number 1 is done. Hour number 2 is on the way. When we come back, we'll be talking about the Death Squad, so don't go away. We'll be back after the top of the hour news. Our guest once again is Mr. John Hankey. He's the documentary filmmaker of the Romney Exposed short. I think it's a fantastic short on just how shady Mitt Romney actually is in his very, very unknown past. There's a lot of things that we don't know about it that are really coming to light. Isn't that right, Timmy?
Boy, you know, when you think about some of these things...
I'm still floored by 173%. I mean, it's just, wow.
Yeah, and that just proves that there's got to be some criminality involved here. I mean, because who can pay off, 173%? I mean, 100%. I mean, think about that, but 173, and you got Madoff that only do, 10.5. So, yeah, pretty interesting. And, something that I was thinking about, guys, was when you start talking about the drug trade and, and maybe Bain Capital being involved, Bain being involved in some of that along with the Bushes. And, well, they obviously have to know the Clintons, because a lot of that stuff, through Iran-Contra was being run out of Mena, Arkansas, and Clinton was governor. So you got a real sordid cadre of corrupt politicians involved here.
Yeah, you sure do. Now, John, before the break, you were talking about the death squads. Can you elaborate more on the Romney death squads?
Oh, well, okay. I want to get to that, but I wanted to say a little something. You mentioned just before the break about you asked me whether I thought there was a feud, a rivalry between the Bushes.
Yeah. Well, kind of elaborate on that. Do you think there was?
No, I don't. What I want to say is that I think, and I said a little bit about that. I think the Bushes are thugs, right? The Bushes aren't rich; they've never been wealthy. But what they have been is willing to kill people and do the dirtiest of the dirty work on behalf of their billionaire masters. And so I don't want people to. Right, I mentioned earlier that woman in Texas, the Republican woman in Texas, who said, who killed him, the CFR? And that's the answer. It's not the Bushes. It's the Council on Foreign Relations. It's the Morgans and the DuPonts and the Gettys and the Rockefellers, right? The people who sit down at that table. Well, if you don't have several $billion in your bank account to which gets you a ticket to that table, if you don't have that, then you have to be a thug, and you have to have murder in your background. And, Romney's not a billionaire, so he has to have murder in his background. Which takes us to another topic altogether, but we'll leave that one alone. We can come back to Romney's murderous background anytime you want. But, let's talk about... See, I said that when you look at that 173%, there's no question. There can't be any question but that he was involved in drug money laundering. There's no other possible way that he could have generated those profits. And then when you look at who he's connected with, which is the people from drug dealers in Nicaragua and people who are washing their money through Panama, you can't draw any other conclusion. I think it's absolutely inescapable to draw that conclusion. Now, the question that I would then like people to ask is, what were they doing with the money, right? Bush is involved in these drugs supposedly in order to raise money in order to support the efforts of the Contras and the other things that had been cut off by the Congress. And one of the points that I make in the movie I was raised Catholic, right? I went to Catholic school for 18 years, and I think that Jesus Christ is the greatest teacher in the history of the world, and I wholly endorse the principles of Christianity, of loving your neighbor and devoting yourself. Look, I've been a teacher in the poorest neighborhoods. It's the freaking hardest job in the world, and I've been doing it out of my dedication to humanity. If I don't mean to pat myself on the back, but I think you're supposed to devote, it was my Catholic upbringing that tells me that you're supposed to devote your life to helping others. All right. Anyhow, so what are the Bushes doing? They're murdering Catholic priests, and there's this really, I think, to me, moving segment in the video where Bush is speaking, and this nun, you don't know that she's a nun, I'll tell you she's a nun, and she yells at him, she heckles him from the crowd, why are we murdering priests in El Salvador? Well, I went to a Jesuit high school, and those were Jesuits that they murdered in El Salvador, and god damn, I tell you, when they show you the dead nuns, I have a hard time looking at it. I mean, and maybe it's my Catholic background, or maybe it's just that I'm a human being, and I haven't done a poll of people watching it to see whether it breaks down along those lines. But just the most horrific stuff that these death squads were doing. They murdered the Archbishop of El Salvador. Right there, they go in and they slaughter a village, and you get to hear this woman describing the slaughter of the children in the village. Right, first they drugged the children away from the adults. Then they slaughtered the adults, and this woman took a bullet, but she survived. She played dead. She's surrounded by dead adults, and then during the night she gets to hear the children being murdered, and she talks about that. And then you get to hear this nun, an American nun, describe being kidnapped and gang raped and tortured, and the leader of these monsters who took her to a military prison to do this, and obviously they're death squads, it was an American, and you have to connect those dots for yourself to say that he was CIA, but of course he was CIA, because the CIA, and the LA Times article says that the guys that Romney was recruiting to Bain Capital, to whom he was paying 173% a year, which would turn their $1 million into $14 billion over 10 years, were death squad connected. They were death squad connected, and Romney welcomed them in. It wasn't a secret that the U.S. government had identified these guys as being death squad connected, and those are the people that Romney sought out. And when you listen to these descriptions, we had a little bit of a discussion about this before. I said that the Nazis tortured people that they thought were guilty, and Bush and Cheney are torturing people who they know are innocent of the crimes of 9/11. There's a description. The guy was the health minister of Panama, and as health minister, he was offended by the cocaine traffic, and he spoke out about it. And the description of the torture that I'm not going to go into here is just insanely horrific.
Yeah.
I mean, I've never heard anything that the Nazis did. I've never heard a description of any tortures by the Nazis that comes close to what Romney and those people were funding. And there's no question that Romney, given that he was so deeply involved in Panama and with these Panamanians who were laundering drug money, there's no question but that he benefited directly from this incredible torture of this particular individual who was trying to rat out the Panamanians who were laundering drug money. So, he was a beneficiary. Well, does that connect him to the crime? Well, he was also paying them, right? He was funding it. Does that connect him to the crime? I think those two things connect him to the crime.
Yeah, no, I mean, it is definitely. I mean, if you're knowingly funding something like that, absolutely. But you know what? I saw something in the 2008 presidential election, guys, that kind of it showed me a severe lack of humanity on Romney's part. And he was going to an event, and he was intercepted by a wheelchair-bound medical marijuana patient suffering from MS. Horrible MS. And medical marijuana was the only thing that adequately treated his pain. And, so he tells Romney that, and Romney says, well, I'm for synthetic stuff, but, I can't support the medical marijuana. And he said, well, I just want to know, would you arrest me? if or my doctor if we had medical marijuana on us. And he says, no, my stance is I can't support it. And he walked away. And just that look on his face, you could just see it.
Oh, he was cold. He was really
very cold, ice cold. When we come back, folks, we'll continue our conversation with
Edge with Mr. John Stokes. Monday through Friday, it's 1 to 3 Eastern. Always informative and always insightful. It's John Stokes and The Edge right here on the Orion Talk Radio Network. It's the Freedom Link program with Joe Joseph, Tim Watson, our special guest tonight, Mr. John Hankey. And we're talking about his new film, which you can find on YouTube, folks. It's called Romney Exposed. Mr. Hankey also produced JFK 2, which you can find on the internet. The thing he did about this latest film is, hey, there's no charge for it, folks. It's free. So, again, you can go see it on YouTube. Just look up Romney Exposed from John Hankey. And, boy, I tell you what, have some fun with that one. Anyway, we were talking before the break, John, just about kind of what an interesting character Mr. Romney truly is. Let's finish up those thoughts on what you were saying before the break.
Yeah, you know what? People can go to Netflix, and it's called Dark Legacy. JFK 2 is now called Dark Legacy. And please, and let me say that a couple of times, go to Netflix and watch Dark Legacy and give it 5 stars, please. Let me say that 10 more times, or pretend I did. Dark Legacy, Netflix. We were talking about Romney and what kind of an individual he is, and I said earlier that I mentioned that Dick Cheney was the monster that he is, and he has chosen Romney. And my question is, how? Right? I mean, how did Romney come to their attention? And while we're on that topic, and you were throwing out some things about how cold-hearted he seems to be, I want to point something out that I've read some priest was writing about this. That Ayn Rand, right, both Romney and Ryan are huge advocates of Ayn Rand. And Ayn Rand, if you'd called her the Antichrist, would thank you very much and shake your hand. She absolutely, I mean, she was absolutely Antichrist. I mean, that she would be the first one to say so. She would say it proudly, and she would boast, and she would say, yeah, that's my reason for being. That's my reason for writing, in order to preach against Christ and Christ's teachings, and to say that all of that stuff is criminal, right? To say that loving other people and trying to help other people is criminal, that it's immoral, according to Ayn Rand. And these are the, well, so I don't know how these guys have escaped that, and I don't know, you know,
So you're not going to the new Ayn Rand movie then, right?
Probably not, eh? Well, you know, I don't believe. I told you. I said before. I think Christ is the greatest teacher in the history of the world. I totally support that sort of thing. I think that Ayn Rand, therefore, is one of the great monsters in the history of the world of philosophy. Right? I mean, if a philosopher can be a criminal, she's as criminal as a philosopher can be. I think, but so are Romney and Ryan. Anyhow. Just this is a quick point, and I throw it off. I didn't stick it in the video. Didn't think it was worth sticking in the video, but I think it's interesting to observe. Somehow, Romney came to the attention of these dark lords, and they said, hey, somebody go recruit that guy. He's got something that we want, right, in terms of evil. He's got something on the ball. And there were these stories, I don't know if you or the people in your audience noticed, but when he was in high school, he was this really cruel guy, and there was some little wimpy, effeminate kid who had longer hair than other people. And Romney led a gang of people and went and jumped on this kid and held him down and shaved his head. And all of the people who were there as Romney's friends said that it was really disturbing. They hated it. They regretted it. They thought it was horrible. And Romney was asked about it and said that he didn't remember. Anyhow, I don't think that was something that had probably come to Dick Cheney's attention, but here's something that I think might have. Romney, sometimes you can hear him talk about his time in France. He was evading the draft, and in order to evade the draft, he had to become a missionary. And, you know, hey, you want to become missionary so we can evade the draft? Yeah, sure. Where do you want to go? Africa, right? I mean, now we're China. Isn't Africa China? Isn't that where missionaries go? Hey, I know what. Let's go to Paris. I hear the wine.
Oh, suffer.
Right? The food. The food is exquisite.
Hard living.
Hard living. Let's go live the hard life of missionaries in France. And so he went to France, and he talks about what a hard life he had because his supervisor put him in this little rat hole of a hotel where he had to share a bathroom with everybody on the same floor.
Oh,
and
yes.
it was just terrible, and he just hated it.
The horror.
And the horror. And he killed the wife of his supervisor. And his supervisor was one of two in an automobile accident, right? It was an accident. He didn't mean to do it. Well, you believe that if you want, but something brought him to these evil guys' attention. And I think that it's very plausibly this. It's interesting that George W. Bush's wife also killed her best friend in an automobile accident. They were in two different cars, right, in Podunk, Texas. And you believe what you want about that, but it seems to me more than likely that she got mad at her best friend and killed her. And the Bushes said, Barbara Bush said, man, that's the girl I want for my daughter-in-law. Go get her.
Yeah.
Anyhow, Romney kills his supervisor's wife. His supervisor, one of two things has happened. His supervisor is either so broken up at the death of his wife, or he's so chilled that this freaking Romney guy has murdered his wife, and he knows that he's going to be next if he doesn't beats it, and Romney becomes the head of the Mormon mission in Paris. Now, this is getting really strange, and I didn't put it in the video, and it's out there, but it's there. The building that he moved into is a palace. Well, how big a palace is it? Well, it was then a palace, and it is now a palace, but it is now the palace that belongs to the United Arab Emirates. Well, those guys got bank, right? You know that if they have an embassy in Paris, it's a freaking palace. Well, that's where Romney moved after he killed his supervisor's wife in an automobile accident. Hang on. So Gabriel Giffords gets shot in the head, and 7 other people get murdered. And I put a little bit of this. It goes by in about 10 seconds, and I just flashed everything up on the screen, and if you want to hear about it, you got to stop it and read it. The guy who shot Gabriel Giffords has all of the earmarks of a Manchurian candidate. He doesn't remember anything about it. He liked Giffords, right? I mean, he's Sirhan, start to finish.
Yeah.
And the thing that really got my attention was that he wanted to join the Army. He cut his hair. He was working out. He stopped smoking marijuana. He passed the English test. He passed the math test, and they rejected him because he said that he had smoked marijuana. Well, he had stopped. He passed the urine test, and they rejected him. Now, I know for a fact that that's garbage. You spread that on your roses, it'll make them bloom beautifully, right? So what happened? The military identified this guy as malleable, as hypnotizable, as this is a guy who we can, put under hypnosis and send off and have him do things for us. That's my take on it. But why would they do that? There's a number of reasons that Karl Rove hated Gabriel Giffords. All right, so you can put Karl Rove in the category of who benefited, but I think also that it would have been prime for Mitt Romney to have made his bone. And additionally, somebody was with that guy when he arrived at the supermarket, and the explanation for who that guy was just doesn't make any sense at all. There was a report that he was doing target practice at 2 a.m., and they buried that story when somebody said, well, how do you know that? So there has to be a witness. Somebody had to have been with him at 2 a.m. doing target practice, so they buried that story. Anyway, and there's a couple of other things. Anyhow, so where's Romney? Right, if you want to take the position that Romney had to make his bone, right? He had to commit a murder in front of Karl Rove and George H.W. and Dick Cheney in order to get his seat at the table, right? He's not a billionaire. He had to kill somebody to get his seat at the table of the billionaire killers. Who did he kill? Well, he's running for president. He's in the middle of this campaign, and he doesn't have an alibi. He's missing in action. Supposedly, he flew to the United Arab Emirates. In the middle of a presidential campaign, he flew to the United Arab Emirates. Well, there's the connection, right? He took over and he sold the Mormon palace to the United Arab Emirates. There's some very, very dark and
very interesting things, connections that are starting to form. Folks, we'll be right back after these messages. Another half hour to go, and so much more to talk about Mr. Romney and his dark past. So don't go away. Libya. It's one of my favorite subjects. We'll talk about that when we come back. Don't go away. Orion Talk Radio welcomes new host Rudy Z to the station lineup. Don't miss the His show, Wake Up Call with Rudy Z, Monday to Friday, 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Start your day the right way with all the latest news live from London. It's Wake Up Call with Rudy Z. And we're here with John Hankey. He's a documentary filmmaker and made a great short about Romney and exposing a lot of the dark past of Romney. And one thing I'd like to talk about now is Libya and how Libya played into Romney's campaign, and how did that play into Romney's hands?
Well, I think everybody in your audience sees that the Republicans are pounding on this and pounding on this and pounding on this and saying,
Sure.
"Oh, right, this is..." Well, they're using it as an issue, and I don't know that I can say in any way that makes sense to me what it is that they're saying, but they're saying that the incident in Libya shows that Obama is weak. And I don't know how much time we have, but there's all sorts of aspects that we could talk about. But, I live in Los Angeles, and Los Angeles is the movie capital of the world, and the Los Angeles Times, there's one article about the movie that was made that provoked the demonstrations in Egypt and the demonstrations in Libya against the movie, and then those demonstrations were used as a smokescreen for the attack on the Libyan embassy. There was one article, they put 11 reporters on that one article. So that in Los Angeles, I think that living in Los Angeles, I think I have a rather large advantage over people living anyplace else in terms of the sort of detail that I've been able to just, pick up and read in the paper in the morning about what happened. But so let me talk about that a little bit. I don't know whether you or the people in your audience have noticed. Can you name the guy who was supposedly behind the movie?
What was his name? He had a funky name. I know it was Sam Basili.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, all right, very good. I mean, it's been in the paper. And the thing is that this guy, before he made this movie, had never said anything anti-Islam. He'd never said anything pro-Christian. And he went to prison for fraud 3 times. And this is the official story, I didn't make it up. According to the story, he's sitting in prison, and he suddenly gets inspired that he's going to make pro-Christian, anti-Islamic movies. And he writes the movie. He gets out, he raises the movie, he hires 2 directors, he hires actors, he hires the studio, he hires the prop people and the costume people and the rest of the crew, and he's shooting within 2 months of getting out of prison. And less than 8 months later, so they made this movie. Well, there's all of these various levels of fraud in it, and maybe we'll skip over some of those. But he's got it up on the screen in 10 months. He's got no background in film whatsoever, and he's done all of that stuff in 10 months. It's absolutely beyond belief. That can't possibly be the truth. But the story gets more and more ridiculous because the actors say that they were given a script that didn't have anything about Muhammad in it whatsoever, so that after they had done the shooting, then they had to hire new actors and do new voices, and they made this... Well, it's rather murky what happened at this point, but there was at one point. Well, and when all of this stuff hit the fan, and the ambassador got murdered in Libya, Sam Basile disappeared. Right, he wrapped himself up, and the only pictures you'll see of him typically are right with a hat and glasses and a scarf wrapped around his face, and being escorted by the sheriffs, and then he was arrested by the feds for violating probation, and I think perhaps for his own protection from the guys who did this obviously black op. But anyway, this other guy comes walking in named Sam Klein, or is it Steve Klein? And Klein sits down in front of Reuters and anybody else who will sit still and tells his story. And he says that the movie was made as a trap. The original movie was The Innocence of Bin Laden. And, there's no question that that's what the movie was named. I mean, he's telling the truth when he says that. There's it was showed at a movie theater in Hollywood. There are posters, and there's several different pictures of posters that were put up in Hollywood. And he says that the purpose of this movie, called The Innocence of Bin Laden, was to sucker Bin Laden supporters to trap them, to entrap them into coming to see the movie so that he could identify them and hand their names over to Homeland Security. Well, obviously this guy is a intelligence agent, right? And he may be a low-level buffoon, but he's a low-level buffoon who's made a $60,000 movie in order, it's a ridiculous story, but, a couple of days later after I saw this story, I saw another story about how ridiculous the stuff that Homeland Security was doing in order to try to trap bin Laden supporters. So, it happens to fit into the much larger picture perfectly. But then somebody took this movie that they had made to trap bin Laden people as an intelligence operation, and they edited it down into a trailer to promote a movie that doesn't exist. And in this trailer, they portray Muhammad as a womanizing gay child molester, and I don't know how anybody gets to be.
Yeah, how do you fall into all those categories at one time?
Well, I think the point was to obviously, and then this is the point.
Cover all your bases, right? Yeah.
Well, the point is to provoke people, right? I mean, obviously this, and then it was translated into Arabic. Well, why would you translate it into Arabic? You think you're going to reach, but it doesn't make any difference anyway because there was no movie. This was promoting a non-existent movie. Well, it wasn't promoting a non-existent movie. It was made to incite riots. And who would want to incite riots in the Middle East? Well, I can tell you who. With the PNAC, right? The Project for a New American Century, the same guys who staged attacks in New York City and blamed them on Islam, right? The same guys who say that the problem isn't terrorism, the problem is Islam. Well, that's Elliot Abrams, who was a PNAC member, a PNAC founder, 9/11 plotter, and one of the key advisors to Mitt Romney. So they make this thing, they promote it, they time it perfectly so that the demonstrations occur on September 11th. Well, if that doesn't tell you that it's the perpetrators of 9/11, which is that it's PNAC and it's Cheney and it's G.H.W. Bush and so on, Richard Pearl and Wolfowitz and on and on and on, if that doesn't tell you, well, I don't know if we're going to make it with the rest of this, but then I think by everybody's accounts at this point, there's demonstrations going on. They're very peaceful. They're very respectful. And 100 guys in 20 cars come swooping up with RPGs and bazookas and AK-47s and other hardware. And witnesses said the amount of fire being rained on the American embassy was, quote, ridiculous. I don't know how it is that they only killed 4 people. That's something that's rather beyond belief. But anyhow, this was not an accident. It was not a demonstration that got out of hand. It was an operation, and it was an operation by very well-armed, very well-organized, and so on individuals. And so they launched this attack. They launched it at about 7 p.m. Washington time. I'm sorry, 11:30, 6 hours, it starts at 5:30 Washington time. 2 hours later, it hits Reuters. That's the first appearance that it makes on any news source is Reuters. And Reuters reports that one person is dead, and an hour after that, Hillary Clinton makes the first government statement that somebody's been killed and so on and so on. And the Romney people responded 2 minutes later.
Wow.
And 2 minutes later, an official spokesman said that they had already, that they had had a discussion among all of the top advisors, and that it was unanimous that, yes, they should attack the Obama administration for being weak on this point. Well, how could they have had a response 2 minutes later unless they absolutely, totally knew in advance about what was going on?
Foreknowledge, you bet.
Yes, right, absolutely, because they were the perpetrators of it. And then a couple of days later, this guy, Elliot Abrams, who I mentioned before, who's PNAC and says that it's not terrorists, it's Islamists, it's Muslims who are the problem. He says, oh, yes, well, we were waiting for this. He says they were waiting for it. And about 5 minutes after him, another Romney spokesman comes out and says, well, if Mitt Romney had been president, this kind of thing wouldn't have happened.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, that's the centerpiece. That's the backbone of the position that they planned to take. It's the reason that they did all of it, including making the trailer, using their agents to make sure that it hit on 9/11, that the demonstrations took place on 9/11 so that they could sweep in behind them and pretend to be having something to do with any of this.
Wow.
It certainly didn't benefit.
Hold that thought, John. Hold that thought.
Okay, sure.
We're going to break, and when we come back, it'll be the final segment of the broadcast, folks, so don't go away. Much more to talk about in a very short span of time. We'll be back in 3 minutes. This is the Freedom Link on the Orion. What you hear tonight, and you want to learn more about John Hankey and his work, you can visit his website at www.thedarklegacy.com and also bushkilledkennedy.com. If you go to those two websites, it'll take you to the same place. That's thedarklegacy.com.
Bush killed JFK.
I'm sorry, Bush killed JFK. And that is a great site. And there's a movie you can watch here too, right, John?
Oh, there's lots of stuff. There's several videos there, and I recommend them all. And go to Netflix and watch Dark Legacy, which is the new version of JFK 2. It's much more elegant. It's got 20 minutes. It's 20 minutes longer than JFK 2.
Very
Dark
good.
Legacy.
So how do you want to wrap this up in this last?
I got it figured out. I want to talk about the fact that Bush had this rally in Florida.
Yeah.
Romney had this rally in Florida at the juice stand of this huge cocaine trafficker. The guy was a famous cocaine trafficker, and, we don't have to discuss, I guess, why he's not in prison, because he's a huge cocaine trafficker, and those guys never go to prison for long. Anyhow, but you have to wonder, and why would Romney choose to have this rally at the stand, the juice stand of this cocaine trafficker who gave away free juice and support? I mean, it was all arranged. And he was interviewed, I think this was in the LA Times, but I might have read it somewhere else. But he's interviewed by the news, and he says, oh, yeah, the Secret Service knew all about my cocaine background. It didn't bother them, and so, here we are doing this. And how can they be so bald-faced or bare-faced or, they think that we're so stupid? How is it that they can do these things? Well, and this thing about Libya, right? 2 minutes. 2 minutes later, how are they stupid? Or do they just think that we're insanely stupid? And I think that the answer to that question is that they are so confident that they have the press completely cowed and completely controlled that nobody will ever talk about Building 7 coming down, that's never going to be in the mainstream press. Nobody is ever going to talk about, the issues raised by a plane hitting the Pentagon without any shots being fired in defense. The mainstream press is never going to raise the most obvious issues so that they can do this really crazy, crazy obvious stuff like attack Obama 10 minutes after the Obama administration makes its first statement on the subject and say that, oh, yes, they had these discussions, these thorough discussions with all of the policy advisors, and it was a unanimous decision to do this, and they managed to do all that within 2 minutes. How can they be so confident that nobody in the press is going to say, well, wait a minute, dudes, you knew, you must have known to have made all this preparation? And the answer to that question is Gary Webb. The answer to the question of how they can be so confident in the press is Gary Webb. Gary Webb wrote the story. He wrote I don't know how many installments, probably 8, and then he wrote an 800-page book called Dark Alliance. But in the San Jose Mercury News, it was very, very famous. He won the Pulitzer Prize, and then he shot himself in the head twice.
Yep.
And that takes talent, by the way. Yeah, it takes talent to shoot yourself in the head twice. I think
what it takes is practice. You have to practice over and over.
Practice a few times. Very
and
good.
after a while, you get it down. You get it right.
Yeah.
And not one single newspaper article on the planet, even in the alternative press that I've ever been able to find, says anything about the fact that you can't shoot yourself in the head twice. None of them. I found one article that in Mother Jones or The Progressive or something, some left-wing supposedly article defending, Gary Webb, kill the messenger, it says, and it talks about how, poor little Gary Webb is being attacked posthumously for the great stuff that he wrote, but it says in the article in the opening paragraph that he committed suicide. And
Sure.
I'm sorry, but I think that if you shoot yourself in the head twice and they don't have an autopsy, we don't need an autopsy, right? If they didn't do one, we don't need one. We know, right? It had to have been George Bush and his friends, because otherwise there would have been an autopsy. It's the most obvious thing in the world. And in fact, I don't mean to run on, and feel free to interrupt, but when Gary Webb shot himself in the head twice, I called up Cyril Wecht. I happen to have a friend who, Cyril Wecht is, he's in JFK2. He's the coroner. He was the head of the Coroners Professional Association. He was elected by the coroners in the country as being for their spokesman. And as he's talking about it, you can see him get red in the face, and the spit is flying out of his mouth. He's so angry, describing the ridiculousness of the notion that the Zapruder film shows a shot from behind when it shows him being thrown violently backward in the direction of the shot, and shows very clearly a shot that was fired from the front right, which is the grassy knoll area. I called up Cyril Wecht and I said, do an autopsy on Gary Webb. He said, I'll do it. He said, I've noticed that. I want to do that autopsy. I normally charge $10,000. I'll do it for $5,000. And I said, I'm a school teacher. I said, okay, I'll raise the money. And, my wife is a hero, and she said, yeah, all right. Anyhow, before we could do it, the police agents who were supposedly Gary's friend went up and scared. Gary's wife had signed the paper giving us permission, his ex-wife, giving us permission to do the autopsy. And they went to her and said, honey, you don't want to do this. Burn the body. And she said, okay. And she called me to apologize. But as I was saying, it doesn't matter. You don't need to have an autopsy. Right? You don't need to do one on your own. If the coroner decided you don't need to do an autopsy with a two-shot suicide, then you know that this was done by the intelligence agencies of the country, who let the coroner, obviously the coroner was told, don't do an autopsy, by somebody who had sufficient weight and authority and scare the poop out of you authority to make him say, oh, yeah, all right, I'm not going to do the most basic elements of my job.
Who was another reporter that just got knocked off? Oh, Breitbart. Same type of idea, only he just, he drops dead. And this is right before, I often find that these people sometimes, these reporters, they come out and they say, well, I got this great story, and all you got to do is wait for this, to get the pomp and circumstance up. But they don't put it out on the street, and then they end up dead. They end up dead.
Dorothy Kilgallen is one of those. Right, all of her closest friends said that she was murdered. But Breitbart, the thing about Gary Webb is they could have given him a heart attack. They could have put him had him be in a car accident. They shot him in the head twice.
Kind of like as a just how overt it is. It's almost like a message.
It's not almost like a message. Yeah. It's a screaming blood
it's a
red
glaring billboard.
It's a warning.
Brain gas splattered on the wall message.
You get involved. This is what's coming for you.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, and nobody even raises the issue. You cannot find in print on the internet anyone even raising the issue. And all of these guys who praise themselves as being devoted friends of Gary Webb, none of them even raise the issue. I don't know if you guys ever heard of Mike Rupert.
Yes, you bet.
Well, Mike Rupert attacked the crap out of me for trying to get an autopsy.
Really?
Oh, man. Listen, Mike Rupert, you heard it here, folks, is a friggin' operative. Well, you tell me, right? He attacked the crap out of me for trying to get an autopsy. And look, anybody can say anything they want about, he was depressed or he wasn't depressed or whatever. Nobody's opinion is that important. If anybody on this planet deserved an autopsy in a two-shot head suicide, it's Gary Webb. He deserved it. He should have had it. And anybody who says otherwise, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, any closing thoughts before we end the broadcast, John? You want to plug anything? Go ahead.
Watch Dark Legacy on Netflix. Watch Dark Legacy on Netflix. It's only for free. If you go to Amazon, you can Google John Hankey at Amazon. I have the assassination of JFK Jr., which hopefully we'll talk about next time. Bush was a shooter. He got arrested as a shooter in Dallas. All of that's at my website for free. We'll go into the details next weekend.
Oh, absolutely. This coming weekend, we're going to have John on again, folks, on Conspiracy Chronicles, and when we're actually going to delve in to that whole subject, because you just can't do it all in one night. So that's awesome, John. This coming Sunday night, on Conspiracy Chronicles.
Well, and I think I'm not just blowing this out the top of my hat. The evidence for this is very, 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 very solid. I couldn't believe it. The first I heard this, I saw the evidence, and it took me a year to have the guts to open my mouth, because it's just beyond belief. But it's there, and it's incontrovertible. He was arrested coming out of the Daltex building.
Yeah.
Which were, right, there were shots from the Daltex, there were shots from the book depository, and there were shots from the grassy knoll. They triangulated.
The series, The X-Files. Did you ever watch any of that, John?
No.
Well, they had this guy called the Cigarette Man. Anybody that watched the X-Files, probably one of the last shows I ever watched on TV before I gave up on TV. But, as I look back at how they used to portray that guy all the way through, that has to be H.W. Bush. I'm sorry, folks, but and people in the audience that used to watch the show, they'll get the analogy. But yeah, they connected this guy in the TV series with being the shooter also. But I think what was his Carpenter was the director of that show. He used to get a lot of inside information. It seemed like, or maybe someone was just feeding him stuff. But it parallels the whole Bush thing just too closely.
Yeah, I've had writers in Hollywood call me up and say, "Hey, I'm working on this stuff. Tell me the truth about it," so that they could write it into the script.
Yeah,
so that sort of thing goes on.
People want to tell the truth. They want to get it out there, but I think a lot of people are pretty scared.
How much time do we have?
Well, we're out of time, as a matter of fact.
We don't have 10 seconds.
Well, we got 10 seconds. Go ahead, 10 seconds. It is
in the movie Ants. Because you can't say this stuff in the news, but you can put it into a crazy little television series like The X-Files, and you can put it into a cartoon like The Ants. The guy says it's not about the food, it's about keeping the